Welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. My name is Ardian Berisha and I'm the Portfolio Marketing Manager for Information Security and Management at BCB. Today we will be discussing how to minimize threats in your information system using network segregation. Our presenter for today is Mr. Mohamed Tawfik, who is a qualified technocrat and a seasoned IT telecom professional having over 20 years of solid experience with multinational corporate organizations planning, deployment, government, audit, and enforcing policy on information security practice. Please be informed that you will have the opportunity to submit written questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the question pane of the control panel. I hope you will have the chance to learn new valuable things in today's session. Please, Mohamed, you may start with your presentation.
Thank you, Ardian. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining this webinar. As Ardian was just saying, it's been 20 years working in the field of information security, working with multiple telecommunication companies in the fields of information security, audits, governance, ISO 27K, and so on. So, today's topic is one of the critical backbone of business issues, okay, which is the network infrastructure. As you know, I'm sure everyone has faced this throughout his days of work. Today's enterprise IT infrastructure is very diverse, is very complex. It has a lot of challenges and it is creating a lot of challenges to the enterprise ability to maintain any sort of balance between functionality, performance, and security. Okay, so today's topic is going to be about network infrastructure and the threats surrounding that topic. Okay, so today's networks. So how are we using our corporate network and our network resources today? So those are just 5 bullet points out of the top of my head. So we are using it for what? For email, calendar, contacts, okay, instant messaging, of course, voice over IP, which is a good amount of traffic used there, conference calls and so on, okay. We're also using it to access the intranet. So most or the majority of the applications and the tools we are using today is hosted on the intranet and are web-based applications, okay. So again, you're traveling across your network infrastructure to your data center, or even if it was a cloud-based application, again, you're accessing it through your network resources. You're also accessing your corporate network, maybe through a Wi-Fi hotspot, maybe through a VPN connection, through public internet access, okay? And of course, there is the never-ending and never-increasing use of personal devices, okay? We all have heard, of course, the term BYOD, bring your own device. So all of us are now using our personal tablets, personal laptops, personal smartphones, and at minimum, we are just using it to access email. But more corporates are going to make it more, to enable more applications to be used on handheld and personal devices. From what is said and from the usage that we just mentioned, networks are a common target, okay? Actually, they are the primary target for any attacks. Those attacks can be as simple as just a simple hacker trying to sniff some packets, trying to get access to some information, okay? And it can go deeply into maybe a more targeted and more concentrated attack, like denial of service, for denial of service objective, for example, targeting to bring down your website or your mission critical server, or simply add more congestions to your network and consume your bandwidth so your employees cannot function and cannot utilize or use the resources they are trying to access. So, as information security specialists, what can we do? Okay, at least, I mean, we all agree that security, you can never stop, you can never be 100% secure, all right? But let's make it harder for the attacker, okay? Let's make his life a bit harder, okay? and hopefully the time consumed in him trying to bypass your controls and your defenses, that will be enough time for you to detect that there's an attack going on, and you are able to mitigate or to prevent it somehow. So once the attacker gains unauthorized access, okay, network segmentation in that case can provide the effective controls you need to mitigate the next step of network intrusion, and also to limit any further movement of that attacker inside your network, or the propagation of the threat he is proposing. So by properly segregating the network, you are essentially minimizing the level of access to sensitive information. Okay, maybe applications, servers, people who do not have a need to know privilege or a need to know access. Okay, they don't need to. So, for example, isolating the data center in a separate network segment, okay, and enabling user access while admins have full control. That's a very basic thing to do. So that's how traditional networks, traditional flat networks are distributed today. So you have a couple of core switches, okay, with the data center connected to it, servers, mission critical servers, and so on. Maybe that data center is accessed through a VPN connection or an SSL connection. And you may be more advanced and have a small DMZ, and you're having your web server or your email server hosted in it. And you are building a trust boundary between your corporate and the outside world. The outside world can be as wide as the internet, or it can be as simple as personally held, personally owned devices or BYOD equipment. I'm introducing here the term attack surface. So what's the attack surface? Usually the attack surface are the points that you are expecting an attack to originate from. In our case here, the attack surface can be from the internet, or it can come from the lower boundary, which are the locally connected office plant floor, personal devices, and so on. That's not good. The flat network is not good. What you need to have and what you need to go for is a more segmented networks approach. So you need to segment your network. You need to apply appropriate controls. You need to break your network into multiple attack surfaces, not just a single attack surface or maybe two attack surfaces. You need to create multiple attack surfaces. And for each attack surface, you can apply multiple controls to prevent any threat agents from reaching out your critical network resources. Those controls that you need to implement will vary according to the criticality of the resource hosted inside that network segment. Okay, so as you see in the diagram here, let's propose maybe multiple VLANs. We have VLAN 10 hosting HR application server and HR database server, for example. We have VLAN 20 for finance. All the finance applications are hosted in that VLAN. You have, for example, all the wireless access points are in a separate VLAN, an isolated or semi-isolated VLAN. You have all the voice over IP on a separate VLAN. That's the approach you need to follow. So that brings us to a confusing, or a couple of confusing definitions. We all know the term network segmentation, or we all may have heard network segmentation and network segregation. Okay, but quite a few of us who actually realize the difference between the two. So what's the difference between network segmentation and network segregation? Network segmentation is about partitioning your network into smaller networks, just like the previous diagram here, having multiple VLANs, okay? And each VLAN is hosting a certain service or certain resources, okay? That's called network segmentation, Okay. What about network segregation? So network segregation is about developing and enforcing a rule set controlling which computing devices are permitted to communicate with which other computing devices. Okay, so segmentation is more about segmenting or partitioning your network into smaller networks, while segregation is about developing and enforcing the rule set that will control the network segmentation and that will either permit or deny access between resources and each other. Okay, those terms are sometimes used instead of each other interchangeably, but it's not correct. You need to clearly understand the difference between the two of them. Okay, so network segmentation and segregation benefits. What will happen when I have them in place? If you implement network segmentation and segregation, you simply minimize the level of access to corporate sensitive information without stopping or impacting your business from operating effectively. Okay, how is that done? Let's show an example of a multiple network structure. Okay, like we showed in the previous domain, you can have many different networks existing in your corporate. Okay, and for all of those networks, you need to create a separate segment, a separate network segment. Most commonly, data center, voice over IP, lab and test environment, which is a huge focus for ISO 27K auditor. The first thing is going to be asking you, hey, where is your lab and test environment? Is it isolated? How are you isolating it? The user's VLAN, which the users are connected, just sharing files and using IM and accessing email and resources. Technical management network, maybe you have a separate network where the administrators can access your core switches and core routers and network elements and configure, troubleshoot, monitor them. A DMZ, demilitarized zone. Maybe you have some more dedicated networks. Maybe you have a small department in your corporate that is dealing or accessing sensitive or highly critical information, so you need to isolate them, to add them in a more isolated network with higher privileges, with higher security privileges. Okay. Wireless LAN, and also you can do segmentation based on territory or sites. So maybe if your corporate has multiple sites, if you're a bank and you have multiple branches, so you'll have every branch in a separate segment on its own. So what's the risk that made us talk about all of those activities and network segmentation and segregation? There's a lot of enterprise risks involving or surrounding networks. Mainly loss or exposure of sensitive information. So if you have a breach, if you have a hacker snooping in or sniffing packets. A huge availability concern if you were targeted by a denial of service attack. Okay. Maybe someone can introduce malware or exploit resources in your network. Imagine if you have a flat network and a virus spread and you didn't implement network segmentation. Instead of that virus spreading in the user segment only, you'll find it spread across all your data center, all your servers, all your web servers, everywhere. Leakage of sensitive data, including malicious data as well. Having unauthorized access to resources. Again, if I have a user that has access to the technical network, for example, he can easily have access and maybe change the configuration of a wireless hotspot or a core router or a core switch. Okay. Increased pressure on existing resources by business processes, for example, backups, increasing the volumes of traffic, increasing the utilization of your network bandwidths. Okay. you may have issues while provisioning access for supported applications. Okay, the help desk will need to support a highly diverse population of resources. Okay. And of course, the evident requirement for audits, reporting, discovery, and forensics. Okay, it's a lot easier to achieve when you are having multiple network segments in place. So we talked about the risks. Let's talk now about how can we mitigate the risks. There's a lot of technologies in place that can be used to mitigate the previously mentioned risks surrounding networks. I cannot list them all. I'm just listing on a high-level basis the most common ones. So implementing a demilitarized zone, that's a basic, okay? And even if you are running a flat network, most corporates and most companies now are mature enough to host at least their mail server and their web server and their internet-enabled applications in the DMZ, not inside the intranet. Implementing server and domain isolation. So you have a small VLAN for servers if your company is too small to have a separate data center, for example. Implementing storage-based segmentations. You have a separate network segment where backups are stored, where you have maybe some storage drives, some storage NACs, some storage equipment. Okay, so you separate it away from the operational or from the production environment. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the DMZ, the demilitarized zones. Okay, as I mentioned, you can simply implement them to segregate different security domains. Okay, in order to do so, you can utilize technologies as simple as just a VLAN, virtual local area network. Okay, as simple as that. You can have a DMZ by a VLAN. Okay, separate physical links and systems. Okay, having traffic flow filters. Okay, installing network and host-based firewalls, application firewalls, proxies, content-based filtering, integrating with a AAA service, having network access control. Okay, all of those are some technologies that can be utilized within your DMZ, considering that it is one of the highly exposed segments of your network. There are a lot of other technologies that can be used. Simply just think in defense in depth approaches while you're considering the DMZ. For example, if you're having two firewalls, you can have firewalls in series from different vendors. Okay, now you can have defense in depth protecting your DMZ. Okay, so is it that easy to mitigate? Well, another famous statement: security always comes with a price. Okay, if you're having or planning to have multiple networks, that means you cannot get away with it easily. There are drawbacks. Okay, it will mean that you'll have extra overheads. All right. 4, provisioning access. So you'll have multiple network configurations. You need to maintain multiple network equipments, several firewalls, several rule sets, several traffics, so several user sets. So provisioning is or will be an overhead when you go for that approach. Administering the equipment and administering the configuration management, support and implementation costs. Of course, there are additional costs if you are going for network segmentations, as simple as just buying more routers, more firewalls. So it includes additional hardware costs. So for those drawbacks, how can we overcome them, or what can we do to overcome them? So first thing to do, you need to make sure that you are maintaining an up-to-date architecture diagram for your entire network. and make sure that any critical change is reflected in your architecture diagrams. That will make the provisioning, administration, support, and configuration management costs significantly reduced. Okay, most of the time you are losing a lot of time due to an unauthorized change, or let's say it is an authorized change, but maybe it did not reflect in the actual diagrams or in the actual configuration management. It was change management was not properly followed. That will lead to a lot of problems. So the first thing you need to consider is always maintaining an up-to-date architecture diagram for your network, and always reflect any changes you make in it. Second thing to do, AAA, implement AAA solution. Okay, have a radius or have any solution in the market that will enable you to provision users and enroll, register users, and assign privileges and assign access rights. Okay, have centralized management of your network equipment enabled. Okay, so that should reduce the provisioning, access, and the administration costs. Another proposal, you can go and implement network access control solution. Okay, network access control solutions are very popular nowadays. Okay, it became needed when we started to go and look for BYOD solutions. So ever since, the need for having network access control was there. So network access control, which is also called network admission control, is a way that you can perform, which one is it, segmentation or segregation? Okay, so it's network segregation. Okay, that's how you will enforce the rule set and how you will enforce the configuration of segmentation. So network access control is the way you will be able to restrict data that each particular user can access. Okay, you will be able to regulate and restrict the things individual subscribers can do once they are connected. Okay, so the benefits for that, you're going to keep rogue devices off your network. Okay, you can ensure that 100% of your endpoints are actually compliant before they are allowed access to different network segments, and if they are not compliant, then you can quarantine them, or you can forward them into a less secure and a more public segment of your network. Okay, you can somehow monitor and prevent vulnerabilities. Okay, maybe check that the antivirus is up to date, maybe make sure that the latest DAT file is installed before allowing access. Check for operating system patches, make sure they are up to date before allowing access. Lowering also your support costs, okay, by having automatic remediation of any non-compliant machine. So how does that work? Let's simply look at that diagram and assume we have a device, okay, let's say a smartphone, which is number one. Okay, step number one. So this smartphone is trying to access your corporate network. Okay, so we have a smartphone trying to access the corporate network. Network access control solutions, they come in two flavors, with an agent installed on all devices or agentless. All right, so let's assume that we have an agent-based device. So it's owned by a user, a legitimate user. The user is trying to access the corporate network. Okay, so it will be connected through a policy enforcement point, a switch or a controller. Okay, he will check the policy and see what is allowed to be, how is it allowed to be accessed. Okay, if the agent states and if the device meets the requirement, the security requirements set in the policy, okay, he will be allowed access to the corporate network. If not, okay, if we have a rogue device or a non-authorized device, he will again connect to the policy point, enforcement point, check the policy, and then they will perform scanning of the device. If that device meets the requirement, so maybe it has an antivirus installed, or maybe it's not rooted or not jailbreaked, or maybe it has all the encryption in place, it will allow it access again. If not, okay, it will direct him to a remediation service. So it will be directed to a quarantine network, an isolated network, where he can automatically have the missing antivirus, the missing patches, the missing softwares, okay? And then after that, he can try to attempt to connect again. If he failed to do so, he will be granted access through the quarantine network to the internet, and that will be the way we deal with guests. Okay, so if we have a guest that is trying to access your internet, okay, he wants access to the internet, this way you can provide him access without having him go through your corporate network. A lot of solutions in place for network access controls, a lot of technologies, a lot of advancements are being made in the discovery and in the agents. Sometimes you have an agent, sometimes you don't, but it's a very effective method, and it has initial cost to implement, but however, the overall, it reduces the overall cost. Okay, so we talked about network segmentation, we talked about network segregation, okay. ISO 27001 standard has addressed this specific point. As you know, the 27002 is defining 12 security domains, okay. I'm not going to state all of them, okay. Out of those 12 security domains, you have one of them called communication security. That domain is of great importance to protect your critical network information. So, what's the objective of the communication security? The first part of it, 13.1, network security management. The objective is to ensure the protection of information in networks and its supporting information processing facilities. Okay? In Annex A, 27001 2013 version Annex A, okay, that's the control objective, ensure the protection of information in networks and its supporting information processing facilities, okay? And it has three sub-controls, 13.2, 13.1.1, network controls. The control objective states that the networks shall be managed and controlled to protect information in systems and applications. So the auditor here will be searching and looking for evidence that you have the proper configuration, the proper control on your network, on your information systems, the proper VLANs in place. The second control objective, 13.1.2, okay, security of network services. So it states that security mechanisms, service levels, and management requirements of all network services shall be identified and included in network services agreements, whether these services are provided in-house or outsourced. So when you have network segmentation in place and you have a segment for the data center, for example, that data center has a service level agreement, has a definition, has a requirement, has bandwidth requirement, is identified, clearly identified with criticality, who has access, access rules, everything. How are you protecting it? These are all documents and policies that the auditor will be looking for. The security mechanism here, it can be simply a firewall, it can be a DMZ, it can be a network access control, it can be some proxies and some application firewalls. 13.3, segregation in networks. We have a dedicated control for segregation in networks, okay? It simply states the control objective groups of information, services, users, and information systems shall be segregated on networks. And as you all know, the word shall means it's a must, okay? It's something you must be doing in your network. So if we looked more deeply into the 13.1.3 control, segregation in networks, which is the main topic of our webinar today, okay? In 27002 guidelines, okay, you have the implementation guidelines. Here it is stating that if you are managing the security of a large network, you need to divide them into separate network domains. They can be chosen either based on the trust level, okay, server domain, desktop domain, public access domain, okay. They can be selected based on organizational units, so maybe HR, finance, data center, marketing. It can be a combination, so maybe you can combine server domain connecting the finance, or maybe server domain connecting the CRM of the organization. Okay. For the segregation, you can do it either physically or logically. Okay. So maybe by having a VPN. That's VPN is one of the solutions as well that you can utilize to segregate your network. In all cases, for any network you define, okay, you need to identify the perimeter of the network, the perimeter of that domain, okay? And if you have access between the multiple network domains is allowed, you need also to control that access, okay? So you cannot tell me, okay, I have two network segments, okay, but they are connected to each other. No, there has to be a controller in between. So maybe a firewall, maybe a router with some rules or some routing rules that prevent access or filter access. Okay. So simply you need to have a gateway. You need also to have access control policy defining how are your networks being accessed, what are the policies, who has access, what are the access requirements, what is the value and classification of information processed inside each of your network segments, okay? Some special requirements are always present for wireless networks, okay? Because they are the ones who are, you can never easily define a border or a perimeter for, okay? So it's a wireless network. Come on, if someone is crossing down the street and we have a strong signal, he can access my wireless network. So for that, you need to treat all wireless access as external connections and try to segregate access to those networks from the internal network. So simply try to deal with the wireless network somehow in the same way you deal with maybe the internet, for example. So you must have a wireless network segregated, separated, and connected to your network maybe by a firewall or by a router as well. Okay. Also, encryption, authentication, user level of access, VPN, modem, out of band, in band, all of those are addressed in that part of the control. Okay, so with that, I conclude the session. So I hand it over to you, Ardian.
Thank you, Mohamed, for delivering this great and informative presentation. We want to inform you that PCB provides training and certification services for ISO 27001 Introduction, Foundation, Lead Implementer, and Lead Auditor. The training is designed to provide you the required knowledge to carry out audits of information security management systems against ISO 27001 and be able to run the processes involved in implementing the ISMS. A PCB certificate will exemplify your dedication in implementing and managing these processes and frameworks, and most importantly, you will be recognized worldwide. For more information about our certificates and our webinars, please visit our website www.pcb.com. Now we will go ahead and take some time to answer some of the questions from the attendees regarding today's topic. The first question is, in what terms does the network segmentation assure you that it will decrease the risk of the threat?
Well, for that, as you said, if you have multiple attack surfaces, it means that you can assign multiple levels of security. Okay, you can assign multiple levels of security according to the sensitivity of each of your network segments. Okay, let's look at it from the very simple way of protecting your own house. Okay, so in your own house you have multiple rooms, but then you have one special room where you have all your study material and all your private stuff. It's locked with a key. Okay, so if an intruder comes in inside that room, he will have to bypass the key first, and then inside you have a safe. Okay, so you cannot have the same control as you have on the safe, okay, and put it on your front door outside. It will be extremely difficult for normal users to use the resources. So having segmentation enables us to apply multiple levels of controls according to the sensitivity of each of the network segments we are trying to protect. So if we're talking about a technical network segment, we can control access and allow access only to administrators. Normal users cannot have access to that network. Okay? If we're talking about voice over IP network, normal desktops cannot access it. Only voice over IP phones can access it. Okay? If you're talking about the data center network, it can be addressed or accessed by users in read and read-write mode and not in full control mode. Okay, hope I answered this correctly.
Yes, thank you, Mohammed. Another attendee asks the computers of the network operators, on which LAN they must be located.
Well, if you're talking about desktop administrators, okay, so they need to coexist in both the technical and the user network, because part of their work they will be solving issues for normal users and for endpoints, and on another time they will need to access or implement configuration or changes on the technical or maybe the data center network. So for administrators, they can coexist.
Thank you, Mohammed. Another attendee asks, can you explain the core difference between the segmentation and in terms of how they may help your company?
Well, segmentation, as I mentioned in the early beginning, okay, it's about reducing the attack surface. Okay, sorry, it's about increasing the number of attack surfaces to reduce the exposure of your network to outside threats. Okay, by doing so, you are able to reduce the threats. You are able to better administer and assign security privileges according to the sensitivity of each of the network resources. Okay, or each of the network segments you have in place, allowing the more valuable networks to be well protected, to have multiple controls in place, to have more restrictive controls, okay, and allowing the less secure parts of the network to be protected with just the proper amount it requires. All of us working in this field are always listening to complaints from users about performance, about security restrictions, about the need to maybe you have two-factor authentication, and all users are obliged to have two-factor authentication. It's very troubling for users. Okay, while if you have two-factor authentication and you are only enabling it for a limited number of resources, which are the critical ones that actually need this measure, you will have more satisfied users. So the majority of users will be happy, and the limited number of users who are accessing this critical resource, they will appreciate it because they know how critical their work is and that they actually do need the extra security factors in place, so they will not give you a hard time for it. Hope that answers your question.
Yes. Now, because of the time limitation, we will only answer one more question, and the rest of the questions will be answered by email by Mr. Mohammed. So the last question is there any specific part of the network system that gets attacked the most?
Of course. Well, the most attacked part of the network is your website. Okay, if you simply have a network probe or have any scanner on your web server, you'll find a huge number of discovery packets, a huge number of attacks being blocked, being dropped. So the web server is your web server, your email server, everything that is exposed to the internet. That is the number one resource being attacked.
Thank you, Mohammed, again for this great presentation, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. I would like to let you know that this webinar will be recorded and posted at our website and our YouTube channel. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey about the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete it and provide us with your feedback. Also, if you're aware of an interesting topic that you would like to discuss and participants would benefit from, please feel free to write down your suggestions. Next Wednesday, we will present a very important topic about how to determine a proper scope selection based on ISO 27001. Thank you all and have a great day.